One of the things I would say about this map of life is it's a bit buggy and it's a bit slow. When you're like clicking around and like to actually get the data out of there, you can tell it's more of like a university project, where you probably have to have like a little bit of data nonce to sort of get what you want from it. So then I also, well, that's sort of interesting, but I was getting a bit frustrated in terms of like what I could do with it. So then I went and found this map.
All right, so it looks like we're live. We were just making fun of Aaron's profile picture, who's our producer. He's got the wild lockdown man look, big ginger beard. All right, so we're in. So Michael, looks like you had a new haircut there. You're looking sharp.
Oh yeah. Got the sides lopped off. I wanted a mullet, but they just kind of did their own thing back there. So
mate,
it's like a standard haircut.
Yeah. If you went for the mullet, Michael, it would just be too much Theo Von.
I'll try to get my mom to send me. I'll get my mom to send me pictures. I think when I was like 8 or 9, I actually had like shoulder length mullet. I'll try and find a snapshot of that for later.
Second. I need a haircut. I've had this. Everything's out of control. I've said to myself, I'm going to get a haircut once a month now. Haircuts are so expensive here now. It's like £25 for a haircut and beard trim, which is I'm missing
$1.50 here.
$3 haircut. That's what I need. So I've left it. Yeah, I've left it a bit long. I'm looking a bit wild. All right, so let's jump in. So today, as promised in the last podcast, we are in Africa mode. So today's podcast is all about Africa. So in the last one, you guys who watched will remember we tried to do a challenge where we had to name the 50, how many countries in Africa? 57? 54.
Yeah.
Try and name the 54 countries in Africa. How many did we get?
40?
28.
28.
We get more.
Yeah,
more than that.
Well, we didn't do well. I think we got like 70. We got 76%. So yeah, we got
76%. That's not bad. That's not bad. Well, we could get fact checked because it's all on film. So we'll find out who's got the right number afterwards. But what we said in that one is we realised how little we know about the continent of Africa. So we decided to dedicate today's podcast to using maps to learn more about the continent of Africa. So I think we've all bought something here today. Who's going to kick off? Who wants to start?
I'm going to use your map for mine, Chris. So if you want to go first, so I don't like spoil your. I'm using yours as a reference point.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, use it. We'll talk about different things. So pull up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and share my screen here, and we've got. So this is one of Chris's maps. It's in MapStack. I'm using it as a reference guide today, and I'm a coffee nerd. I think we've mentioned that before. I'm sort of a coffee and like agriculture-ish type stuff nerd, and so this sort of gave me a chance to talk about coffee in Africa because coffee comes from Africa, specifically Ethiopia. And there's this really cool story of how it comes from Ethiopia and then goes all around the world and then comes back to Africa. So sort of in like 9th century, they're aware of coffee in Africa and Ethiopia, and then it finally sort of jumps this gap from Ethiopia to Yemen sometime around the 1400s. I've got my notes down here, and then it doesn't make its way anywhere else until about the 1600s, 1600s. It finally makes its way to Europe. And it comes through Venice and all the classic places you can think of when you think of artists and cafes and coffee shops. Venice. It came to England in 1650s, Paris and Germany and all that. And then from there, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't do too much background on this, but I think it was through some acts of colonialism. It was introduced to places like India for cultivation, and as well as Indonesia, and then finally it made its way over to Central and South America, where I think a lot of people are more familiar with coffee from, say, like Brazil or Colombia, and then up into Central and South America. And then something I found really interesting while I was doing this, because I didn't know, I thought, because of proximity, all these other African countries would grow coffee too, but it was pretty much limited to Ethiopia and Yemen up to this point. And then finally in the late 1800s, some missionaries brought coffee from Brazil to Kenya. And so hundreds of years later, we see the introduction of coffee into its neighboring, Ethiopia's neighbor here, Kenya.
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
Just jump in. Sorry, did flow there. So you shared a map with us. I think it was 2 episodes ago, where you were looking at how you can use maps to identify which crops are grown in certain areas. And
Right.
then you can see other areas in the globe that have a similar climate, so you can make the guess that you could probably take that crop to that climate and it would do well. Now, I might be completely wrong here, but when I think of Ethiopia and definitely Yemen, I think of kind of dry, arid, quite flat places. And then when I think about where coffee is grown today, so I've never been to where it's grown in Brazil, but I've seen where it's grown in Cambodia and Vietnam. I think about these like lush jungle hillside type places. How did it evolve during that trip around the world, where it started in Ethiopia and turned into something different? What's the
Yeah,
deal?
so you got 2 main crops. You've got Arabica and Robusta. And I actually have some graphics that sort of lay that out for you. Here we've got, I wasn't able to find this as like map data or be able to import it, but this is what we call the coffee belt. So anyway, so you can see this graphic now. It's sort of just the area between the tropics, right? It's limited pretty much to equatorial regions in terms of who produces coffee. And then it's also limited by altitude. So you'll get really plain, bland, even if you're in the tropics, you get really sort of instant quality coffee, freeze-dried coffee. A lot of times will be this sort of 600 to 700 meter range of mountains. And then you get nicer coffees the higher you go. And if you notice, I've got a topographical map here that sort of highlights, if you notice in Africa, you're really only limited to these higher mountain ranges where coffee can be grown in Ethiopia and Kenya, almost exclusively, right, with these really tall mountains.
So just to interject there slightly, that map answered a question. So something that I was wrong about is I thought that Kenya and Ethiopia were very flat, and Yemen. But if we look at there, we can actually see that Yemen is has some quite high hills and mountains there.
Yeah, that surprised me as well. I thought of Yemen, I just, sort of ignorantly assumed it was desert. And then it dawned on me, wait, it's on the coast. And then you've got these pretty high mountains there. And that looks like, this sort of tells the story of the jump from Ethiopia to Yemen in terms of geography. It was pretty easy to find a similar growing range.
Something that might be interesting, actually, because you said it originated in 800 AD, around that period.
Yeah.
Is what was the extent of the Ethiopian country at that time? Because I think a lot of the borders in Africa changed a lot during colonialism. Now, my understanding is that Ethiopia was one of the big powers on the continent back in the day. So their borders, a little bit like Cambodia today. Cambodia now is quite a small country in Southeast Asia, but back in the day, it was the big regional power and consumed what is modern day Thailand and Vietnam. I wonder if Ethiopia had a similar thing. So the coffee may have been grown in what is modern day Kenya, possibly. I'm probably setting off all kinds of political rows by even saying something like that.
Actually, I don't know about that period between, 900 AD to say the 1500s. What I can say is I think that, I think there was a lot of religion involved. Like, for one, when coffee came to Europe, it was sort of thought as a Muslim drink. And so the dominant religion in Europe at the time, there was sort of some struggle there before finally they were like, okay, we'll allow a cafe to be opened in Venice, that's where they had their first cafes. But what I can say is I found this map of coffee bean production in general, and I'll just
on that point, I just pulled up a map on the Ethiopian Empire, and the map shows that the boundaries of Ethiopia were much, much larger historically. So the Ethiopian Empire stretched into most of what is a lot of modern day Somalia, Kenya, and the surrounding countries. So that empire was about 1270. So it was in the range of the coffee growing area.
Okay.
Anyway, side note.
Okay, so that may have been the same sort of kingdom in terms of like they were. It was easy to trade or to share agricultural practices at the time with Yemen, and it just Yemen may have had a better connection with Europe around the 1400s. But with this coffee bean production, this only goes back to 1961, and something that I found very interesting that I wasn't looking for. That is that here you see there's no data on Ethiopia whatsoever in the 60s, and that was sort of anomalous to me because I'm like, well, it started there. Why is it not showing data there? And I thought maybe Our World in Data here just didn't have data for it. And I was like, well, maybe if I scroll forward through the 80s and the 90s and try to find, we see here it just suddenly appears in 92 to 93. And it's suddenly 180,000 tons of coffee being produced, like overnight almost, right? And I didn't know very much about this area of the world historically, so I just typed in on Google, 1993 Ethiopia, and I became aware that there was a war of independence. I didn't know this, and it gave me an opportunity to sort of learn a bit more about the region, and the Eritrean War, and how that ended in 1991, and so that makes sense why there would be no production data, perhaps, up until 93. It's not that they weren't producing coffee, it's just maybe the data wasn't being collected at that time during the war, or
central government was too busy fighting wars to be worrying about collecting data points.
Sure.
We always bang on about Cambodia, but having worked with open data in Cambodia has exactly that. There's basically nothing from the early 70s to the mid late 80s. There's just this massive hole.
Yeah. So, and that pretty sums it up for me. This is what I found interesting. I mean, I like to nerd out about coffee and how to brew coffee and roast coffee and stuff. But this gave me a cool opportunity to sort of dig deep into the history and sort of the geopolitics of coffee, so to speak.
So the Ethiopian coffee. So what I often see when I'm walking on my walk to work, how many coffee shops there are in modern cities now? There's 50 of them. They all have their sign of the guest coffee outside. And I see Ethiopia is one that I'm seeing increasingly. Ethiopian guest coffee is on the list. So I'm guessing, like when you go to a chain coffee shop, most of it's coming from Brazil. Looking at that map, so most of it's Brazil. So if I order the regular coffee, it's coming from Brazil. So if I order the guest coffee, what's the kind of flavor profile of an African coffee or an Ethiopian? So
it depends because of Ethiopia's the coffee's trip around the world. It wasn't there. It went through these biological changes along the way. Like it was introduced. It was actually cultivated. Or they attempted to cultivate it in England. I don't have the notes on the date or when it was, but they really did try to grow. I know they also grew bananas in England at one point too, but. But coffee that they tried, and they were like, no, it's definitely something about the soil or the climate, and so they sort of it spread everywhere that they could, But Brazil was actually what introduced coffee to Kenya, and so it has a drastic, and it was hundreds of years later, is sort of reintroduced after having been cultivated across the world. Similar story with coffee in Papua New Guinea came in the 1900s or late 1800s from coffee beans from Jamaica, and so you'd be surprised, like how much 100 years grown in a different environment sort of changes the flavor profiles and stuff. So in terms of like flavor profiles, you've got Ethiopian coffee, which is generally considered to be chocolatey, fruity, fairly light, flowery. Whereas Kenya is more full body, citrus, herbal. It's very dense. It's rich. And then Yemen is actually a completely different varietal, if I'm not mistaken. And it sort of has a chocolatey or a winey taste to it. And they have they grow coffee even in Liberia. They have Liberica coffee, and it's completely different.
Oh, wow.
With the Ethiopian stuff, 'cause I remember when I've seen it before, it's always, like you said, it's like a guest, or it's positioned as more of an artisan coffee or like a higher quality coffee. Is that the case, or is that just like a marketing thing? Does it have highly fertile ground in order to make very high quality coffee, or?
Yeah, well, it depends. Like, for example, like in Hawaii, we had coffee is grown in Kona at 700 meters, and then on the same island at the coffee farm that I worked on, we were up around, we were well above 1,000 meters, and so on the same island, we produced drastically different coffee that had a different flavor profile, simply from being, several hundred meters higher up from sea level. And what you'll notice is like Ethiopia and Kenya and Colombia and Papua New Guinea, they're the only ones that have expanses of mountain ranges that average 1,500 meters, because you don't want to grow on the very top of the mountain for wind, and it's just not hospitable. So you're looking at parts of the world here on the topography map that sort of back to your point, Chris, of your basic coffee that's grown in Brazil. Well, Brazil doesn't have it doesn't seem to have large spanning mountains. You'll notice the gradient changes as you zoom in on the scale, so it looks like mountains suddenly appear, but most of these are under 1,000 meters. So you're getting average tasting notes from what's predominantly grown there. But that being said, you could find a small batch, high altitude grower that's growing at like the highest heights in Brazil, and they're going to produce something better. But that's not what your bag of coffee at the supermarket's going to be. It's going to be something grown at 500 meters, 600 meters.
So there's a direct correlation between the height of the mountain and then the quality of the coffee. So the higher the better. Okay.
Yeah,
So
and
what
also latitude mimics altitude in terms of agriculture. So you can go higher up in latitude while going lower in altitude and get sort of a similar effect, because you'll experience a similar winter. So it's really interesting phenomenons in terms of.
So can I go into Starbucks tomorrow and say, like, listen, I want forget your guest coffee. I want 1,500 meters equatorial.
100%. Yeah, give me the.
They're gonna
Give
get
me.
out.
It's like, do you have anything grown in Everest, please? Like actually on Everest. So but that's it. That's it for me. I'll kick it over to I think Chris. This is your population.
Yeah, it's got my map here. I think I'll go last. Let's get Lawrence in next, because Lawrence.
Okay.
I think Lawrence we've got a bit of a game again as well, and some other bits. So let's.
All right, let's do it.
I seem to be the sort of the game master.
The Game Master. Do you remember that TV show, Game Master?
Is that a TV show? Is that a British TV show?
Oh, you're probably too young. When the first computer consoles came out, the Super Nintendo and the Sega, they had TV shows where you could watch, because no one could afford the games, like $50 each. You get one at Christmas. There's this TV show that was 30 minutes, and they'd show the latest games and the latest consoles, and you just watch people. It was like what the young kids are doing now on TikTok and live streams and Twitch and whatever they're doing. It's like that, but in the 80s version.
Okay. Well, in terms of the map that I brought today, so when you said, Chris, like last time, that you were going to do you wanted to do the Africa podcast and find out more about Africa, I was thinking, like, what would I find that, because I knew that you're probably going to go away and find a lot of data for the country. So I was thinking, like, what would I be really interested in, like, to bring myself, or at least to find out. So, like, one of my ambitions is to, after I've got married and gone on the honeymoon, and after that, I would love
6 kids.
Yeah. Then I'd probably, once I, could say, go like a proper safari to Africa. So I was thinking, like, actually, I could use this as an opportunity now to sort of check out, like, where the distribution of, say, like lions and like different animals across Africa. And I came across this. Can you see my map? So can you see my screen?
We got it.
Yeah, so it's called the Map of Life. I've never actually heard of this before. I think it's based. It's a lot of the people who are running it seem to be working at Yale University, and they are basically building maps and making data available so that you can go and have a look about all of the biodiversity of Earth, which I think is a noble effort. In terms of so what I did first was to look at the lion distribution. So the green is just basically where they are distributed, and then the purple is where they've been spotted. One thing that I was actually going to do, it was download this data and then see if I could like pull it across into Mapstack to make something a little bit more user friendly, because one of the things I would say about this Map of Life is it's a bit buggy and it's a bit slow when you're like clicking around and like to actually get the data out of there. You can tell it's more of like a university project where you probably have to have like a little bit of data nous to sort of get what you want from it. So then I also, well, that's sort of interesting, but I was getting a bit frustrated in terms of like what I could do with it. So then I went and found this map. And I think like one of the points that to sort of separate this out is like, this is a much more basic map, right? And it's just color coded really, really easily. But in terms of like a visual like data set of seeing exactly what you want to see, is like where are the lions, where are they extinct, and like where are their substantial populations. This map is just really, really easy. You can see, oh, okay, along the east coast of Africa, all of these countries have substantial, they're resident there. So if you wanted to go on a safari, you could go, okay, well, maybe we go Kenya down through Tanzania to Zambia or to Botswana. And then you can actually like click over and you can see where the lions were once resident, but now they're in small numbers because the populations are dwindling. And then you can see where they're actually extinct because they actually, they used to spread across the whole of Africa. One sort of fact that I sort of brought out of this that I didn't know is that the wild lion numbers have reduced dramatically since the 1940s. So it used to be 400, like almost 500,000, and now there's like 20,000 extinct in 26 countries. So this was like my little voyage of discovery. So what I think I might do is try and, as a little project, is to maybe just see if I can find this data and bring it over into MapStack to make more maps that are like this, as opposed to something like this, which is, I just think this is information overload a little bit. I can actually download the data here. I'm sure this is really good for like researchers, but for just a general use, if you just like, where are the lions in Africa? I think this is a much more, it's a much more understandable visualization, and it's something that you could make in map. Something just to finalize that, it's something that I could probably make, I think, and would be interested to make as a project of my own. So yeah, that was my project.
That's a really interesting point. Just to kind of riff off that a moment is the. So something we talk about a lot at MapStack is this idea of on-ramps. So on-ramps into open data and into the wider tooling of GIS. I think there's a lot of things out there that are aimed at the very kind of high end, the upright end of the market, that are very data rich, very detailed, very powerful, but they're very inaccessible to somebody who's just coming in. And this data set's a great case in point. The map from the University of Yale is awesome if you're a researcher, really detailed data. It probably has all of the metadata with it. Everything's there. But from somebody who's not used to maps, that could feel inaccessible in some ways. So one of the things we're trying to do with MapStack is build that on-ramp. How can we have these simple maps that will take somebody from 0 to 1 with mapping? And those more advanced tools are all there waiting for them. Okay, so once they've kind of wet their toes a little bit with this early data, they might go get the bug free and go, I want more, and then go looking and access more sophisticated tools and more sophisticated data sets.
Yeah, I think that's the point that when I was actually going through this process myself, is something that I thought, and I just sort of think what this example here on screen now, it sort of elucidates for me is that like a data visualization can be really, really powerful if it's simple and it can just tell you exactly what you're looking for. As soon as I landed on this, I was like, oh, okay, done.
I like how you don't.
I was like, huh? You know what I mean?
I like how you don't really need a legend for it. It's just like, it's like obvious. Green is where they are. Yellow is where they're starting to not be. Yeah, and then black obviously is where they're not at all. Maybe never were. And red's like they may have been here before, but they ain't now.
Yeah, they definitely. If it's red, they ain't here now.
They ain't there no more.
This is the kind of the map. That's the kind of map that you could take into like a junior school and speak to the students and discuss this topic, and they would be able to interact with that map. The map of life is something, maybe a university course that would be more suited. They're all completely valid. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, a lot more detail. Both maps are extremely valid and powerful. They're just positioned in different places.
Yeah. And this here, it tells the same data. Like this point here, it's essentially the same. It's the same insight that you can gain. It's the same places, and then it's actually more detailed in terms of the point data, which is showing exactly where are the clusters, where are the big clusters of lions. As you can see here, it's probably going to be like Ethiopia and Kenya, but like you said, it's a lot more detailed. There's a lot more going on.
And if we go back to the previous map, we can also we can see straight away that the problem is with simplicity is often it's hiding it's hiding problems. So one of the things that stuck out to me like a sore thumb on that map is inside of South Africa, that little red island, Lesotho. So, according to this map, you might think, oh, lions are all over South Africa, but this little island country that's in the middle doesn't have any lions. When the reality of it is the lions that are in South Africa are probably not all over that green area. They're probably in an individual pocket. When we looked at the map of South Africa last time, I think the west of South Africa is very dry and arid, and then the east is more. The east has more green, wetland. It looks like, and I'm not sure which habitat is most suited to lions. But yeah,
you can tell by this point data here. This is probably where the more advanced map comes in, because these purple dots are sightings. So that's basically I think it's just what you said. What you said, right? In the east of the country, you've got a lot of sightings here, and then the rest of the country that's very, very sparse. So there's
what's the green? Sorry, Lawrence. What's
the green? Is the territory where they are. This is their roaming domain, where you actually find them. So like before it was green. I don't know why on this map it's green in all the countries on the other map, but not South Africa. Even though there's point data to say that this is maybe it's because they're in parks here and they're not roaming. I don't know.
I'm not sure. What's the on the south of South Africa? There's like a really sort of dense area that's really like isolated there. Could you zoom in on that? Down again.
This one?
No, right on the sort of southern tip. It's kind of where I'd think Cape Town.
Oh, by the coast.
Yeah, there. What's going on there? Zoom in. I want to know where that is.
Eastern Cape.
Eastern Cape. Okay, it's pretty interesting. There's just this like isolated pocket where there seems to have been a lot of sightings. Sometimes you can get very weird things with data. So think about how a sighting happens. If you were in an area that runs lots of safari trips, you would probably have a high number of sightings. If you're in another part of the country that never gets safari trips, you would get a lower number of sightings. It's there's that old what do they call it? Survivor bias.
Yeah,
you seen that? That infographic. There's famous infographic.
The airplane.
The airplane with the bullet holes. So in World War II, they were I think it might have been the Americans actually. They get in the planes back, and they basically mapped on an outline of a plane where all of the bullet holes were that were on there, and loads of them were in the wing and they're in the tail wing, and hardly any of them were in the main fuselage or the part where the pilot was. So at first glance, you might think if we're going to armor this plane to make it better suited to attacks, most bullets hit the wings, so we need to armor the wings. But in reality, you need to armor the cabin, because they never recorded the data points from the ones that hit the fuselage and where the pilot hit, because they never came back.
Yeah. So it really interesting. I remember when I saw that in like an article. I was like, it was really when they actually did like discuss that. So it's survivorship bias. That's the actual name of it, right? Yeah. It was an article about biases like that. Yeah, it's really interesting how you can misinterpret data sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. So that's why I was interested about that bit on the southern tip of South Africa. I was thinking, is there a city or a tourist destination that's close by to that makes that an easy jump to go and do a bit of safari? So I'm thinking, because I know that sort of southwest coast of South Africa. So you've got like, Durban, East London. So some bigger places there. Cape's further around. And then where's Johannesburg? We need Paul on the podcast. We've got one of our staff is there.
Is that further inland?
Yeah, I think the labelling's not so great.
I don't think you can see it. Yeah.
Well, one of those other things we don't know about South Africa. Okay, should we move on from the safari map then? So, Lawrence, I think you had one other thing for us, didn't you?
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm sort of becoming the game master. So last time it was the countries of Africa, because I thought it was quite fun, and we did okay. But I think, like, as a harder challenge, I think we should now do the capitals of Africa.
Oh, no.
So I didn't want to give you a heads up on this either, because
don't know any of these.
Yeah. So let's see how well we do. You never know, we might do well. But the thing is, I did a quick test of it earlier, and you get 4 options.
You prepped yourself.
Yeah, I didn't do any research, but I just wanted to check that it worked before obviously doing it live. So you get 4 options.
Okay.
So at least you can. There's like a process of elimination you can do. So it's not like you've got to.
Okay, I think we might be okay with this then. Let's jump into this then. I'm feeling more confident now. If it's multi-choice, and usually with multi-choice, you've got like 2 ridiculous answers. So it's going to be
a friend. Aaron will catch us when we go off course.
Can you see it?
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah. You ready to go? Okay.
Let's do
let's
it.
go. Okay, so
Lesotho, I have no idea.
it's not Pretoria because I think that's South Africa. So
Yeah,
that's one
South
down.
Africa. I think we're going to have to go through it quick. If we don't know, just guess one. Go on,
Okay, so
Lawrence.
Mazaru. I think it's the last
Mazaru.
one.
Whoa, yes.
Ah, yeah,
Senegal.
Lawrence. Okay, Senegal.
Good guess.
Senegal.
Dakar. I think it's Dakar.
Dakar.
right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Angola.
Angola.
That's Luanda. Is that Luanda?
Luanda. Yeah, it's not Kinshasa. Yeah, do it. As good a guess as any, I think.
Hey,
Algeria.
yeah.
Oh, that's
we're
easy.
rolling.
Algeria.
This is just going to be you, Lawrence,
Algeria.
and us nodding our heads.
Ghana.
Is it Accra?
Oh, yeah, I am feeling Accra, but I'm not 100%. Yeah, go for it.
I don't know.
There we go.
Hey.
Republic of the Congo.
Ooh, Libreville, Victoria, not Victoria. Kinshasa, not Kinshasa. I would say
It's not
Brazil.
Victoria. It's
I'd
not
say the middle
Victoria.
two, one of the middle two.
Yeah,
Could be
I think it's Avil.
Libreville.
Because Congo was a Belgium colony, wasn't it? So
okay.
it's not going to have a
Okay, so
Victoria.
it was Brazil. It wasn't Libreville. So let's go next.
Okay.
South Sudan.
South Sudan.
Obviously not Cairo or Addis Ababa.
right.
So it's
Yeah.
Juba
Yeah.
or Freetown.
Juba?
Not
maybe?
not Freetown because that's Liberia, isn't it?
I would say
Juba.
Juba.
Yeah, I think is Liberia. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone. It's not Pretoria.
It's not Djibouti.
Not Djibouti. we know all about
Mon-
Djibouti, and it's not Freetown. So Monrovia.
Monrovia. Yeah.
Monrovia. It's Freetown.
It is
Freetown.
Freetown. Okay. Freetown, Sierra Leone.
What did I
Okay.
just say? Oh, I said Liberia, didn't I? It's another country that had a big civil war. Anyway, my bad.
Botswana.
Not Pretoria.
Obviously, it's not Pretoria.
Windhoek.
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 Give it a go. I think it's
I know they're on
Windhoek.
South Africa
I don't
time
think it is-
zone.
I don't think it is Windhoek. I think Windhoek is Namibia. Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
What do you reckon?
I
I
would
don't know.
say
Go for a guess. I've got no idea.
Windhoek
So
or
go-
Gaborone.
Gaborone or
Let's go
Windhoek?
Gaborone then. If you're feeling it's not
Gaborone.
Windhoek,
Yeah.
Central African Republic.
I've got no idea.
Ooh, yeah.
Windhoek.
Christmas tree.
Kinshasa,
I don't know,
it's not
man. Pick
Kinshasa.
one.
Bangui.
Yeah, do it.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, we get pretty lucky. We should
Nailed
play
it.
poker today. This is
Egypt,
we're
Cairo.
Yeah,
Cairo, right?
freebie.
Cairo.
yeah.
Yeah,
Cairo.
that's a freebie.
That's an easy layup.
Mauritania. So it's
Mauritania.
not Dakar.
Uh,
So it's
One of first, third, or fourth. Just take a guess. Let's go through. We've got no idea. We'll be here forever otherwise.
yeah.
let's go with that first one. Oh, yeah. No.
Ethiopia is
Ethiopia. Well, Nairobi is Addis Ababa.
Addis
Addis
Ababa,
Ababa.
right?
Yeah.
Ababa.
Yeah, that's the one.
Gambia.
Gambia. It's not
Banjul?
Dakar. It's
Is
not
it Banjul?
Kinshasa. Yeah, Banjul. It's one at the top or bottom.
Yeah, what do you reckon?
Top.
Malabo.
Malabar.
Bottom. Top.
No.
It was top.
Eritrea.
Right. Eritrea. I've
Good.
no idea. Well, we know it's not Addis
Bissau?
Ababa.
It's
Bissau.
is it? Yeah, I don't know.
It's
I just
not
know
Addis Ababa.
Windhoek
I don't
Central.
think it's
I
Windhoek.
just know they're in Central Time Zone. I don't know which
Okay.
country they're in.
All
So
right.
maybe let's go with the first one.
First or third? First or second? Let's just take a guess.
Okay. Oh yeah, there we go.
Hey, nice.
Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Well, it's not Djibouti and it's not
For
Kinshasa.
sure.
So it's
Say number two.
one or two.
In
Number
yeah,
two,
number-
Michael.
Yeah, I'm
it's
gonna go with number
Kinshasa.
two. I guess it was Kinshasa. Okay, that's the DR
Right, I'm going to suggest
Congo.
something, guys, for the brevity of the podcast, because we got like 54 with 17 in. I think maybe let's not go all the way through. What do you think?
Let's set a time. Let's set a time. Let's do it for two more
Yeah,
minutes.
set a
Let's go.
time. I think
Tanz-
one minute. Let's see if we can
Tanzania.
home. If you want to play it, play it.
But
Let us know what
just
the
give us
scores are.
an answer when it comes up.
Yeah. Hit a comment. Yeah, hit a comment. And
There we go. Molly. Yeah. See, Lawrence, you know a lot of these already.
yeah, Lawrence is.
He's just gonna speed run this. He's been
Okay,
playing
go on.
with this whole time. He actually knows all of the answers already.
Rwanda. I don't know this
Oh,
one.
man.
Oh no.
Rwanda. Yeah.
Eswatini, Bissau. I don't know.
Don't know
Bissau?
what that is.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh. I
Sudan
don't know how to say that.
is Khartoum. Equatorial Guinea. Guesses?
That third
Okay.
one down has got the accent on the E.
I don't know. Cameroon.
Nope.
Yeah, there
No
we go.
clue.
Madagascar.
I did say before we started that I literally didn't know any of these. So I'm learning at the moment. Zambia.
Zambia. Yeah. Djibouti. That's Michael.
The capital of Djibouti is Djibouti. I'm quite
Yeah, there we go.
confident in that one. Yeah.
Is it Rabat?
Algiers. No, oh, I can nearly go. Oh, it's Algeria,
Okay.
isn't it? I nearly messed up.
Sao Tome. Well, should we guess Sao Tome? Yeah, there we go. Chad. What do we reckon?
3 or 4.
No idea.
I'm gonna go
Huh?
with 3 or 4.
3 or 4.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah. There we go.
Uganda is it Kampala?
Yeah,
Yeah. Benin?
no idea.
Porto Novo.
No, Porto Novo. Mozambique.
Oh. Yeah.
Burundi.
Sounds about right.
It's not Porto Novo. Kigali. No. Guinea-Bissau. Oh, that's Bissau. Should we guess that? Burkina Faso. It's not Dakar. Ouagadougou.
There
You sure you pronounced that correctly?
Liberia is. Would you say Freetown before?
No, I would have said Freetown. Maybe there's two
No, it's
Freetown
Monrovia.
capitals.
It's Monrovia
yeah,
because
Monrovia.
of Liberia was the American colony that failed, right? And that's
Yeah,
why
yeah.
it's Monroe. That's the only reason I know that one. I saw a YouTube clip recently.
Gabon is not Windhoek.
Sao Tome.
Malabo.
Sao Tome.
Libreville. Oh, that's Libreville.
Libreville. Okay.
Niger.
Yeah.
But it's not that. Yeah, Abuja, not Dakar, so it's that one. Libya is Tripoli.
Yep.
Malawi.
No idea.
There we go. That was a lucky guess. Seychelles.
Ooh,
It's not Mogadishu. It's not Victoria. Oh, it's Victoria.
Victoria.
There we
Victoria.
go.
Kenya is Nairobi.
Nairobi. Yeah.
Togo.
Lome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guinea.
That third one looks fun to say.
Yamoussoukro. Yeah.
Not the right answer though.
Zimbabwe is Harare.
Yeah.
Cape Verde is. Should we, which one? One or two?
Yeah, it's one or
One or-
4, isn't it? Yeah.
one
I
or
don't know.
4, yeah.
1 or 2, yeah.
Okay. Tunis.
Yeah.
Comoros. I
No
haven't
idea.
even heard of that.
No.
Oh, lucky guess. Mauritius. Port Louis.
Yeah.
Somalia.
Somalia, Mogadishu. There we go.
Ah, there we go. 40 out of
Alright.
54.
It's not bad.
Too shabby.
That's not bad.
Not too shabby.
Okay, so
Split
guys-
through ways.
Anyone who's watching, let us know in the comments. What score did you get? Did you get 40? I think we guessed about 25 of those, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a
Easily.
good thing with multiple choice. There's always 2 that you know, right, it's not those. So then it's a 50-50
Right.
at that point, isn't it? Okay, cool. A bit of games. You got anything else for us, Lawrence? Are you
Yeah, that's
wrapping
me
up?
wrapped for this week.
Okay, so
I'll have another game for next week.
all right, so we're moving on to me now. So let me get my entire screen up. Okay, so what we're doing this time is I have mapped Africa, and I've just made a basic socioeconomic map of Africa because I wanted to better understand demographics, income, and these kind of things, just to understand, how the country's structured. Now, the one that actually surprised me the most, and I'm going to start with, is the total population. Some of the countries in Africa had much larger populations than I'd realized. Now, I knew Nigeria had a large population because I'm sure I read an article somewhere that they'd modeled out future populations, and there was a point in the graph where like Nigeria went past China or something like that. So I knew there was a big population there. So yeah, Nigeria really surprised me. So we go in here and we can see that there's 213 million people. But what's more than that is if we have a look at the fertility rate here of 5.2. So not only does Nigeria have a large population, they have a very high fertility rate, which means they're a long way from that number topping out. What we know is once you get your fertility rate down to 2, you're going to have another 1, possibly 2 generations of population growth, and then you'll probably kind of hit the peak. Nigeria is nowhere near that, it would look like on there.
It's got 17 on the median age.
Yeah, 17, young.
Wow.
That's kind of amazing because I remember I've talked about it on previous podcasts. When I first went to Cambodia in the early 2000s, the median age was 15. And that doesn't mean that everybody's 15. It just means there's loads of young kids because that's an average. It's it's a mean or a median. So the outliers are what, especially with the mean, are what pull it out. Have I frozen? Am I still on video?
Oh,
Okay.
you're back.
Yeah,
We
you're
had a
back.
freeze there.
And we're back in the studio.
So
Your audio stayed in. Yeah.
Yeah, that was amazing for me in Cambodia in the early 2000s. There was just young kids everywhere. Every street, there was like kids running around with footballs, and it just had a really good energy. Whilst, some countries, more elderly countries in the UK, you go to some small towns and they feel like one big retirement home. There's like pensioners, old age pensioners everywhere. So that's Nigeria. So the next country that we're going to look at that also surprised me, and we've already talked about it today, is Ethiopia. I should have known more about Ethiopia. So my kids, when they were at school in Cambodia, were at an international school, and a good friend of my son's was from Ethiopia. So I spoke with his parents a lot. I've been around there, had dinner. So I know a little bit about Ethiopia from them. But I didn't realize there was 120 million people in Ethiopia. So if you dropped Ethiopia in Europe, it would be the most populous country in Europe by a long way. And then Egypt is also quite a large population. I thought Egypt was the largest one, but if you had have asked me to guess, I probably would have said, 60 million, 70 million. I didn't know it was past the 100 million
100
mark.
million.
And what's particularly interesting about Egypt that always kind of surprises me when we think about, let's go to Google. So it's like the fertile area of Egypt, because when a country has 100 million people, you've got to feed 100 million people. And Egypt is really interesting. It's when you move away from the Nile, it's kind of desert there. So let's get on this satellite imagery. So like Egypt looks like a very large country, but when you look at it from this view, okay, you can see all of this. There's nothing here. This is just desert. So those 100 million people are in this kind of wedge that's at the top here on the Mediterranean, and then this corridor that's moving down south following the Nile. So I imagine the actual population density is extremely high in this area and extremely low here. So that's a really interesting country. And just to zoom out a little bit, so compare it to the UK. Now, I know we're on a Mercator projection here, so the scales don't map exactly. But if we have a country that we're familiar with, like the UK, you can see that fertile area in Egypt is tiny compared to the UK. So that was one of the ones that I found really amazing.
Just out of curiosity, Chris, is there any any real urban populations along Egypt's coastline? Like, it seems like they got a lot of coastline. What happens there at the? Because obviously near the river's gonna have people, but does it just go desert and then ocean, or is there sort of?
Yeah, so there are parts. I know there are parts that are further along the coast because it's actually a popular holiday destination now for a lot of people in Europe. So Europe, you're looking for that year-round sun. In the summer months, we're going to holiday in Spain and Portugal. You're going to get that sun, but the sort of closest place that you can get from Europe to get that year-round sun is North Africa. So yeah, there are some other the sort of cities here, like Alexandria. So if we zoom in, we'll see. Yeah, there's a lot of urban areas that follow the coast as well, and it goes inland a little bit. But as soon as we get a little bit further along like this, it's nothing.
Not so much, yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much. So it's still very close to that green, fertile area. And I think this is where the you had the growth of the Egyptian Empire. I think this is some of the most fertile land on Earth, basically. This tract of land along the Nile. But yeah, anyway, pretty amazing. So let's move back onto the Africa map here for some other surprises. The other one was the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, I knew that country was huge. I think in terms of land mass, is it the biggest? I think it's the biggest country on the continent. I'm on the wrong map.
Or Algeria, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's one of those two. So this one's interesting. Once again, 95 million people there, 6-person birth rate. So I wonder if we've got any future projection of the population of Africa. Okay, so we are 2020, 1.3 billion, and then predicted to be up to 1.8 billion by 2035. So yeah,
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Yeah, there's some big growth. So that's going to be the big growth area, because the population maps that we looked at before, we can see that the big area of growth has been, you often see that circle around here in Asia. Have you seen that map where they say there's more people that live inside this circle than outside of it?
Yeah, but that's already happened though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like that population boom's already happened.
Yeah.
Like that's a
Now
bubble,
it's the
right? Like
decline,
Asia.
right?
Yeah. Meanwhile, you got Africa. It looks like it's gonna do that next. I
Yeah,
would
so you've seen
guess.
this before. So there's more people
Right.
who live inside of this circle than live outside of it. So yeah, so that part of Asia was the previous population boom, whilst now I think it's moving to Africa. So there's
Mhm.
probably going to be a point in the future where we'll be able to draw that circle here, because in the
Right.
previous podcast we looked at China's the forecast for China's population, and it was going to get down to like 600 million. Um,
And India
India's
was slowing down as yeah.
India's
And
at
then
that two
Nigeria,
birth rate, so it's not
Nigeria was going to go
slowing
to
it
a billion,
down yet,
right?
but it's reaching the top of the bell curve.
And wasn't it Nigeria that was supposed to go like a billion plus
Yeah,
in the
maybe.
next 40 years?
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, it was something like. I think it wasn't supposed to go to a billion. I think the article that I saw was the story was about China's depopulation and Nigeria's increasing population. I can't remember the exact details of it, but there
So
was.
they'll cross at some point, right? Like
Yeah, I'm not sure whether they'll go. Yeah, I'm not
population.
sure whether they'll go that far. But it was some. The story was something along those lines about populations booming in Africa. It's plateauing or slowing down in Southeast Asia and East Asia. So they're the population maps, and then we can also flip it around the other way, like which are the places with the least population. So we will do a filter on this one just to get down to the lowest one. So we'll say right. So the total population is less than. So let's have a look at the countries where it's less than 1 million. So we can see some of these are quite small countries, but we've got Western Sahara that's made it. This is one of these. Is it a newer country, Western Sahara? I think I tweeted something out earlier in the week about somebody's made a new base map that has the option of turning on various politically sensitive boundaries, and Western Sahara was one of them. So you can, Taiwan can be its own country, or it can be part of China, because that's a hot topic. All right, let's step that filter up a little bit more. So let's go from 1 million up to, let's say, 3 million. Okay, so this is interesting. So a massive chunk of land here with a very low population, Namibia and Botswana. I was looking at a map of Namibia recently. I was having a documentary, and Namibia's one of the only places on the world, one of those places in the world where the desert goes right up to the coast, a bit like we saw in Egypt. So what would normally happen is when you're in an arid place, people would move towards the coast. But this is one of those cases where the desert goes right up to the coastline. Yeah, so if you go up here, there's just nothing here. So if you're looking for that secluded beach where you're not fighting for deck chairs, this is the spot.
Wasn't that like a prime surf spot at one point? I think, but it changes because the shape of the coastline changes over time
Okay.
more rapidly there. I think was the case. So sometimes it's a good surf spot and sometimes it's a different spot, I think.
Yeah, well, it looks like it. There's some serious surf there, but yeah, we can see there's just nothing here for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. And then all of the population, when I looked at it before, is right up on the northern border, basically. So yeah, I had a population density map before, and it's all just skirting that northern border. So another interesting country there, and then Botswana that's slightly inside. Okay, so let's switch away from population. I keep going back to the other map. Let's go to this one. So we know where the people are. Now let's look where the money is. So the first one that we'd often look at is total GDP. So GDP is going to tell you one thing. What's the total economic output of a country? But that's often warped by the population size. So we'll often see quite a tight correlation with the size of the population and total GDP. So if we go in here, we can see that it does follow that to an extent. Both Egypt and Nigeria are dark on this map. And then South Africa's kind of punching above its weight. So 59 million, but has a bigger economy. So that doesn't really tell us about the wealth of these individual places. If we were to visit them, what are we expecting? Are they kind of least developed status, developing status, emerging economies? A more accurate indicator of that is obviously GDP per capita. Okay, so that tells a slightly different story. So now Nigeria's the color's gone to a lot more pale color. So we can see that the GDP per capita in US dollars is, that looks wrong. $290. That can't be right. When is this for? Nigeria. Yeah, 265. It looks like we're missing a zero on this data. Maybe. I'm not sure. But yeah, it looks like I've got some bad data. I'm going to have to look at the map afterwards and see what happens. So South Africa. So we need to do some fact checking here. So 6,900. So let's see what the...
Could just be on a few of the countries.
I think I probably messed up. So that one's right. South Africa's right. I think I may have messed up the join on that data. When I pulled the data out, it was one of those ones where in the CSV, the two of the columns had got muddled up, and I had to go in and do some manual deletes. So it may have cooked the data slightly. But let's look at some of the outliers here, some of the more interesting ones. So we've got small country here, Equatorial Guinea, which has a very small population, 1.6 million, but the GDP per capita is very much in the middle income band. So has anyone got any ideas what's going on in Equatorial Guinea? They got oil there? Let's have a look.
Is it a Belt and Road project or something?
Equatorial Guinea. The economy of Equatorial Guinea has traditionally been dependent on commodities such as cocoa and coffee. There you are, Michael. I should have got that one. But is now heavily dependent on petroleum due to the discovery and exploitation of significant oil reserves in the 1980s. Okay, so Equatorial Guinea's got oil. So if we move down here into, how do you pronounce that? Is it Gabon?
I would always say
Gabon.
Gabon. Yeah, that was it. I knew it was a funky one. So let's go and
Hey,
have a look.
Don't talk too loud about oil because the U.S. government's listening.
Okay.
So we don't.
So let's see if they've got the same story. So the GDP per capita for Gabon is actually very similar to Equatorial Guinea. So we'll go in here. Looks like they've got a modern city there with some high rises. It looks like Phnom Penh, yeah. So it looks like one of those kind of up and coming middle income type places.
Are you sure that's not Tokork?
Yeah.
It could be. So the economy of Gabon is characterized by strong links with France, large foreign investment, dependence on skilled foreign labor, and a decline in agriculture. Gabon enjoys a per capita income 4 times that of most nations in sub-Saharan Africa. Its reliance on resource extraction industry realizing much of its population. So what are the resources?
So mining, maybe?
The oil sector accounts for 50% of GDP. Okay, so that's globally the get-rich-quick scheme is basically to strike oil, isn't it? That's the secret. That's the secret.
Yeah.
So let's go on the other end of the scale here. So let's go have a look at the countries. Let's pull some filters in here. Now the weird thing is I don't fully trust that data because we know the Nigeria is wrong, but we'll crack on anyway. So GDP per capita less than. Now I know this is amazing for a lot of us who, if we spent all of our time in Europe and in the developed world, it's amazing how low GDP per capita can get. Once again, we always talk about Cambodia, but that's like a reference point for us guys because we've spent some time there. When I first went to Cambodia, the average monthly salary was about $40. Okay, so the GDP per capita was really low. It was like kind of sub $400, which at first you say, how can anybody survive that? But it doesn't actually paint the whole picture. What actually happens in least developed countries is most people are subsistence farmers. So what happens is there's not much of a money economy. Most people, they have their parcel of land, they farm it, they produce rice for their family, they have a couple of pigs, and they eat and they trade with their neighbors.
And you live with mom and dad until you're married.
Yeah, you live with mum and dad. It's a multi-generational home. So Cambodia was, when I first went there, was poor. It was definitely poor, that post-war state, but not as poor as the GDP per capita would suggest. Everybody still looked kind of well fed, and it was. You went out to the countryside, and for the most part, it was quite a pleasant place. The real poverty is when you make that shift to urbanization. The urban poor. I think often in a lot of countries, especially ones that are very fertile, like Cambodia, the urban poor have a much rougher deal than the rural poor. So let's go down here. Let's have a look at the places where the GDP per capita is under $1,000, because there will still be some of these in Africa, and you see there's large swathes of it here across Africa. So this is there's actually a name. There's a marker for extreme poverty that they tend to use globally inside the UN. And currently it's like living on under $2 a day, under two US dollars a day. So there are a lot of countries in Central Africa that are still in that predicament. But hopefully, with this population boom, a lot of the countries are going to grow out of that, as they did in Southeast Asia. The number of people in East and Southeast Asia that used to live on under $2 a day was huge. You didn't have to go back that long ago, only 30 years, and you would see a similar picture to what you see today in Africa. But what you see in modern East Asia and Southeast Asia are megacities and skyscrapers and industry, and this huge growth on the back of that demographic dividend. So, speaking of demographic dividends, let's have a switch across to the fertility rate. So we can actually see that there is quite a tight correlation between the places with the highest fertility rate and the lowest GDP per capita. So this is a known trend. When we were talking about fertility rates in the previous maps, what tends to happen when people are subsistence farmers, which is the case for most of the poorest countries on earth, is they tend to have more children, because children are a net benefit. They're a utility. They can work on your farm. You don't have cash to pay outside laborers because it's not a cash economy. But if you have children, they can help you work the land. You can be more productive. The other thing that's very sad in these countries, and unfortunate, is there's very high instances of infant mortality. So children dying before their 5th birthday due to things like diarrhea, poor hygiene,
malaria,
poor nutrition. So a lot of people in these least developed countries will have more children because the harsh reality of life is some of those children might not make it. So Cambodia again, when I first went to Cambodia, 1 in 10 children didn't make it past their 5th birthday. So that was a really bad state of play. And within 30 years, there's miracles happened where now it's, they're not quite at Western levels yet, but now it's like kind of 1 in 1,000 or something like that.
But it's also your insurance policy as a parent. Like if you're not going to get a pension or Social Security, then you have 8 kids to help sort of take care of you as you age.
Yeah, because the state is not going to take care of you in old age. There's no state pension. Yeah, you're going to need the kids to work the farm to look after grandma, and that culture still persists even as countries develop. With the multi-generational home, we've talked about it before on the podcast. It's still thriving in Asia. Haven't got on to the Western model of the nuclear family. And then we've got Somalia out here, which is a bit of an outlier, but this is a post-war country. So this is a country that, if it hadn't have had, its recent conflicts in history, would probably be in a better spot. So we can look at this population change as well, and obviously the population change is going to pretty closely mirror that fertility rate there. So yeah, this is an interesting map. This map's live. We'll put a link to it in the notes for the podcast, so you guys can go in and play with it yourself. I'm going to go and double check the data afterwards and see if I made any more mistakes, like the mistake that we had there with Nigeria. So hopefully the data's all good. And yeah, I think I've learned a little bit more about the continent of Africa than I knew before we started the podcast today. So I now know where the coffee production's happening. I've learned the names of a few capitals. I've got an idea about where the game reserves are. And then we've been able to paint a very basic picture of the socioeconomic information of the continent. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up there now. That's me for my maps. Has anyone else got anything they'd like to add to the conversation before we wrap up the podcast today?
I think that's good. We're coming in on an hour again. It seems to be that hour just seems to be set in. We've just come to a natural conclusion there. So yeah, I'm pretty much done.
I think that's where we run out of steam, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. I got to run. Actually, I've got a kids class. I've got to go teach here a little bit. Yeah, jiu-jitsu. Right. So.
Okay, all right. Let's wrap it up there then, guys. Thanks for coming, and I will speak to you all next week. Stay tuned, guys.
All right. See you next week.
See you next week.